Good morning and welcome to our discussion today. My name is Lisa Kessler, and with me today is Karen Berg, who is the spiritual leader and director of the Kabbalah Center, along with her husband, Kabbalist Rav Berg. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Our topic today we're going to be discussing is called Soulmate Secrets. Are we letting it all out of the bag?
Actually, the whole concept of soulmates is a secret. And it is said that before the souls come down, that they are joined as male and female. And when the souls are parted upstairs, they're parted the male aspect with the female aspect. And those souls come down to this planet not necessarily at the same time. So therefore you can have a man that's so much older than a woman, etc. and so forth. And then if they are deemed lucky enough or working hard enough on their spiritual goals, then they're allowed to marry and to reunite, and that's what's called a soulmate. A soulmate union is a soul that has been part of each other since eternity.
So these two souls have known one another in a previous life. They're together, but not necessarily when they come down.
Not necessarily when they come down. And one thing we should say at the get-go is that most marriages are processes of correction. Very few marriages in this world today are what we call soulmate marriages. Soulmate, how do you define a soulmate marriage? Soulmate marriage is one where both people have same ideology, have same goals, have the same dreams. And normally when you discuss the idea of soulmate, you're not talking about people that have the same goals. I'm going to buy a $6 million house. That's not the goal of a soulmate marriage. Soulmate marriage is a marriage that's based on growing spiritually, on going outside of themselves, on having a relationship that shares with the world. And if that happens, then you can say possibly that this is a soulmate marriage, because one will complement the other. But both of them working parallel to each other will be always seeking to grow and to go forward.
Right. How would you know if you met your soulmate? I mean, other than a person being in lust and there's a physical attraction, what really would determine?
Whether you have, first of all, it is said that the Zohar speaks clearly about soulmate marriages, and it says that most of the times when these two souls want to get together, they may be hit by a great deal of adversary things. They may have difficulty in getting this union together. And that's only because the negative side don't want to see this union happen. So there is a fight not for it to happen. Right. Normally, the Zohar says, it is someone that comes from afar and not somebody that you've been brought up with. It's sort of a meeting. You go to a place and he comes from another place, another town, another part of the world. He can then possibly be your soulmate, or she can possibly be your soulmate. But the most important criterion in a soulmate union is that the people that are involved are almost alike. There's telepathy between them. They enjoy the same type of things. Now that doesn't mean that they have to be alike in their needs. In other words, if I like vanilla ice cream and he likes chocolate ice cream, therefore we're not soulmates.
Right.
This is because we're not talking on the material or the level of existence that we're at right now, but rather the ideals and the goals, the aspirations are such that they agree. The minor things, whether we're going to go to New York on a vacation or we're going to go to Hawaii on a vacation. These are things that are not involved in this type of a union. But also one of the characteristics of soulmate is the ability to be able to converse with each other without the use of words, telepathy. If you have that.
Very interesting. Yeah. Someone once told me that a soulmate has to come from across the water. Is that true?
Yeah, from afar. Normally it is from afar, because it means that soul is being brought together in a place which is different from its origin of birth. It can come from two separate places in their spiritual growth levels, and they find a way to meet. And once that union takes place, then they start to grow together. So afar doesn't necessarily mean space. Okay. It could also mean from where they've come from. For instance, myself and the Rav was from the age of 3, he went to Hebrew school. He was trained in all the religious studies, and I come right out of left field. I'm totally irreligious, and never had any background, 4 generations of American born, And this type of a union is like my mom's thought when she took a look at him. She said, "You're out of your mind. This can never work," because he came from afar. He came from across the sea and the sea of life.
Right, but you knew when you met him, when you saw him, you knew that that was your soulmate in life?
Well, that's a whole very interesting story. I think that perhaps I'll put it on the tape so that people can know the story. I like to begin it with many years, last lifetime I call it, before the Rabbi Berg was what he is today. He was in business, and he had a partner who was brother-in-law. And I was a young kid at that time and went to work. And I met him and this lovely fellow, his brother-in-law, who I thought was a really charming guy. And I was there for a while, I think a year or something like that. And then I left, and then I married, and I had kids, and then I separated, and I was divorced. It was a whole story. Many years after that, I was running a business. I was a manager of a business and needed a secretary. And years before, I knew that there was this girl there who was a spinster and probably would still be there. It was an excellent secretary. And I thought that she'd be perfect. So I called her to find out if she was there, and as luck would have it, she was. And I asked her if she wanted the job, of course, offering her a little bit more money, etc., and so forth. And she wasn't interested. And I just said in passing, "Is Mr. So-and-so there?" And she said, "No, he just collects his mail here. He's no longer in business. He's moved to Israel, and I see him infrequently." I said, "Well, if you see him, please, say hi." That's the end of the conversation. It takes 10 minutes. The phone rings. It's him. He's on the phone. "Hi, I understand you called. How are you? I just got back from Israel. I just happened to walk in, and Carmen just got off the phone, and how are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm fine. How are you?" He says, "Well, I'm no longer in business. I've given that up, and I've been studying for 7 years with my teacher in Israel, Kabbalah." And I said to him, "What do you know about Kabbalah?" And he says, "What do I know about Kabbalah? I mean, what are you talking about? What do you know, Kabbalah?" I says, "Well, you know that since I'm 21 years of age, I've studied any kind of spirituality that I can get my hands on, and I know that Kabbalah is the seat of all the spiritual teachings because it comes from the 5 books of Moses." And he says, "Well, this is what I've been doing, and I've come back here, and my teacher just left me because he had passed away 4 days before this incident." So I said to him, "I'm so interested. Can I make a deal with you? Can I work for you for free if you'll teach me?" And he said, "Sure." We made an appointment to have dinner that night together. I have to tell you that at that meeting it was all over.
There was it.
This is 30 years later. The relationship is the same. But how did it happen? 4 weeks or 5 weeks after this incident, I met him in the morning at Ratner's in New York City for breakfast. And he didn't look very happy. But I was like, didn't know, overjoyed. And he says, why are you so happy? He said, "I have to tell you, I've had the strangest dream last night." I said that a man had come to me in my dream, and he was wearing, and I described what his teacher looked like.
And you'd never met him?
And I'd never met him. And I said, and he put his hands over my head and spoke in a language which I now know is Hebrew. Remember, then I didn't know Hebrew.
Right.
And he put his hands over my head, and when I went to ask him what it was about, I grabbed for his frock, and he walked away. And of course, my husband was elated because he said, last night when I went to sleep, I asked my teacher to come to me and to ask me if it was right for me to teach you. And I was going to tell you this morning that it was off because he didn't come to me.
But he came to you.
But he came to me. And that's the start of this relationship that's ensued for, I hope, for eternity. But this is one of the signs, if you will, of a soulmate relationship.
Such a beautiful story.
Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't arguments and fights and things that happen in the growth of a relationship. Those things happen here as well. But the difference is usually, like for instance, our arguments are usually over other people. Of you should have said this and you shouldn't. But between us,
right, hateful
words for each other practically never exist, because we're there tuning ourselves to the same goal, to the same purpose. And what do I mean that from afar? Is, for instance, my mom was Jewish, and I was raised in a Jewish environment, being Jews as religion. For instance, we wouldn't ride on Yom Kippur when people would see us, but we'd all congregate in my grandma's house and have a feast. But that's as Jewish as we were.
Right.
And here I become involved in a teaching that is Orthodox. But when you talk about spiritual rules, the simple things become easy. Because in any teaching, in any study, one has to aspire to something. In other words, if I wanted to be a yogist, I would have to practice 4 hours a day of yoga. I can do yoga exercises, but to be a yogi, I have to live the life of a yogi. To be a Kabbalist, I have to live the life of a Kabbalist. And that, for me, is simple, because if it's spiritually correct, then materially it should be correct as well. So the union of souls on that level, even though it seems like they're worlds apart, it would be impossible to put together. If there is a common goal and common responsibility and common spiritual assessment, then you have a relationship that can work through time.
Do you believe that also not only this spiritual joining that the two of you had, but also having some sort of a religious following enables the soulmates to continue on their journey together? Is that part of it, or is it not necessary?
I think that more importantly than the aspect of practice is the aspect of spiritual growth, because unfortunately, in our society, there are so many people that are involved with their church or with their synagogue, and they do service and they do performance of services, but that doesn't necessarily make for spiritual growth. It only makes for a place in a society, if you will, a place in the community. But spiritual growth is something perhaps different than that. And in a spiritual relationship, and only in a spiritual relationship, can you have growth and can you have a soulmate union. Otherwise, it's not soulmate. And there's another aspect of soulmate union that I think the listeners might want to know about, is that let's assume that one part of that aspect leaves this world. Probably that woman or that man that's left will never really marry again.
You mean if one of the persons passes on in the relationship, the chances are that this one who is left
will not marry again.
Because why? Their soulmate is now gone?
Because the soulmate is gone, and there's a Jewish law, which is an interesting law. And it says that if a woman marries two men and both of them die, she can't marry a third time.
Why?
Because the energy of the first male remains in her body. Oh. And when this other entity, this other male enters her, there becomes a spiritual fight. That spiritual fight happens and refuses this male to take part in that union. So what happens? That man leaves. The same way as that when, according to Jewish law, there is such a thing as a get, a bill of divorcement. And the reason for that is that sometimes a man, I want to use the example of David and Bathsheba. Now, King David was married, obviously, and Bathsheba was married to Uri. But it says that when David saw Bathsheba, and her name, by the way, which is Bat-sheva, the daughter of seven, which means this world, kingdom in which we live, when he saw her, he realized that this was the mate from which could come King Solomon. And it says that sometimes when a soul is not nurtured enough, is not ready, so the woman is given to another man, if you will, the house in which it would be kept until the union is ready for soulmate relationship. And that's the reason that there is a get or a bill of divorcement in Jewish law. Because if there was not a bill of divorcement, the man would have to die. Because that union would have to take place if that spirit is ready to join.
So if she is with another man and it is not her soulmate,
right.
If she is not allowed to get a divorce, then her soulmate passes on, her husband?
The husband.
Oh,
the other mate would pass on, because there's nothing stronger than it come hell or hot water. There's nothing stronger than a soulmate union, especially if it's there for the benefit of the universe, for the cosmic law. In this situation, I mean, because if you read the story of David and Bathsheba, it looks like adultery. It looks like all the worst type of things you can find in the world, and yet you're talking about King David, the chariot, if you will, for the world that we live in. So, but that's what when we talk about religion, I say the same thing, because if you read literally what it says in the Bible, you've got rape, sex, murder, hatred. I mean, you don't find the love and the compassion.
Right.
King David knew that this was his mate. And for that purpose, he was able to take Bathsheba as his wife, and he understood that Shlomo would be born from that union and that Shlomo would be able to build the temple. So this is one instance in where soulmate is seen in the Bible. There are many others, but the most important concept for us today is that if we're looking out there for someone to be our mate, we also have to look internally, spiritually. Because if we do not grow spiritually, then we will not be able, we will not merit that our soulmate should be a part of our life. We'll marry and have children, but it won't be the same as when you're married to someone who can share all of your life's goals with you, and it's very difficult.
So if we are on our spiritual path that we need to be on and growing and learning, we have a better chance of meeting our soulmate?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But just to note that soulmate unions are rare.
How
very
rare?
rare. Very rare. I just wanted to make another note, Lisa, that I forgot about. The same way as coming from across the sea has to do with spiritual growth.
Yes.
What about Ruth, who was a convert?
Yes.
You see? And she came from across the sea. She came from another existence and became part of the existence of her husband. And so Ruth became a convert, meaning she came from across the sea.
Right. I wanted to share my story with you. I don't know if this is a chance of, soulmates coming together, but in my particular instance, I was born and raised in a very devout Mormon family, and I met my husband in my early 30s. I had been married, I was divorced, and when I met him, I was not involved at all in Kabbalah. In fact, I really was not involved in any sort of religion, quote unquote, whatsoever, but I had been searching for a long time for whatever it was, and I was always drawn to the cosmos, to astrology. The way I was raised, we weren't allowed to read the astrological forecast in the newspaper. They thought that it was dabbling with the devil. And so I had this disconnection with the way in which I was raised. I was introduced to Kabbalah, and the first time I entered the synagogue, I actually came with a good friend, and I witnessed the Hebrew letters when they raised the Torah for the first time in my life. And I had a draw within me that was so powerful that my soul was actually crying out to me, and I could not take my eyes off the Hebrew letters, and I had no idea what this meant. I had a series of visions that happened to me when I was doing the meditations that I was taught, and as Michael and I progressed, I understood that part of my progress, part of my tikkun, my correction, was going to be to go through this spiritual undertaking, which I did, and it was a 2-year process. It was very long and very arduous, and we did it. But in the process, I think that the part of me that was born died off. Maybe, I don't know if that's true. I feel that it was, that my soul left me that I was born with, that I did receive a new soul, and this whole conversion process may have been sort of on the path to where I was finding my soulmate, because I truly believe in my heart that we are soulmates, and I don't know, I mean, is this part of it, or?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, looking at you was the reason that I thought of the story of Ruth.
Oh, you did.
And not only that part, but now I think you understand why the conversion process is a long process.
Right.
Because it takes time before you're sure of what you want to do, you're sure of where you want to go. And the fact that you have accepted it completely, as I have accepted the idea of keeping the way of life that we do, is because you found a spiritual purpose in your life. And that spiritual purpose has created for you in your life, as in my life, a family with children and a home that you feel comfortable in, that
Right.
you feel talks to your soul. That's the kind of a thing that we're talking about when it comes to a soulmate union. But I'd like to also discuss the idea of the non-soulmate union, the 90% of the marriages that are there. I mean, so people are thinking to themselves perhaps, okay, I know I'm not married to my soulmate. Does that mean that I should divorce him and go find somebody else? The answer is obviously not. That's not what the purpose of this is, because first of all, it says a very interesting thing. It says that women come back normally to help their mate. Now, if women come back normally only to help their mate, Well, what happens to the souls of their soulmates? So sometimes it says that there were soulmate unions that had happened, and that created a spark, if you will, another Shlomo someplace in the world.
Right.
And once that's happened, then there's no reason for that soul to come down again. But when it goes upstairs, it's asked, do you want to come back down? Do you want to help to generate light in this world? And that's why female souls come down. And by the way, in the world, that's why there are more females than there are males.
Very interesting.
Because they are the source of generating this spiritual energy.
And they choose to come back again.
They choose to come down. The man...
what about for the male soul coming down again?
The male soul coming down in the male body is coming down only for its correction, whereas the female is coming down for the spiritual aspect. Now, does that mean the female is not necessarily envious and greedy and all the things? Of course, because people come down in this world with two jobs. One job is for themselves, and one job is for the world. And even though it says that a female comes down only to help the male, sometimes that help can be terrible harassment and terrible anger.
Doesn't sound like help.
Right, but it is, because we grow by our field around us, and sometimes we need that pressure, however it comes. And it is said that in Hebrew they have an expression that says, "A woman builds or a woman destroys." And also, part of that is that on Friday night service, when the woman lights the candles and welcomes in the light of the Sabbath, the woman lights the candles because as Eve was responsible for taking the light out of the world, so the woman is responsible for bringing light back into the world. And therefore she accepts that by lighting of the Friday night candles. With that acceptance is that light which is perceived on the Shabbat, is also the radiance of light that generates for her home and her children and her environment. So that's the reason that practice is done, but usually by the female in the house.
Would Adam and Eve have been considered the first soulmates?
Oh, sure, of course, because as a matter of fact, I like to say that's why Eve was created second, because they had to have a prototype, Anyhow, so I think that pretty much says it all for soulmates. As far as the process of tikkun, process of correction, we call it tikkun in Hebrew, is concerned, there are many aspects in whereby marital partners are necessary to change their aspects. The idea of divorcement, for instance, which is a Jewish concept, because it's not the concept of let's say the Catholic Church, and or perhaps there are other religions that don't believe in divorce. Sometimes it's better to separate than it is to live together in misery. I remember a friend of mine who her parents lived all their lives together and then separate rooms and separate lives. And finally, when she got married, she says, "I'm going to walk down the aisle by myself because I've never had parents for a long time." So sometimes we're better off to have a single parent with positive energy than have two together and have opposite views.
Let's assume, Karen, that we're not married to our soulmates. What can we do then to improve that relationship, or should we be embarking on another journey to perhaps try to find our soulmate, or what's the criteria?
I think, first of all, we have to take the aspect of spirituality. I think because everything is based from that. I think what we can do and should do is perhaps get on some type of a program whereby we would learn about our spiritual growth. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be Kabbalah. It can be astrology. It can be whatever it is that will be able to satisfy a person that they can grow spiritually and that they're not stagnated. Because even people that are listening to this tape, are there because they're interested in some type of growth.
Right.
I don't think that going to a weekend vacation with your husband is the way to necessarily grow the relationship. It's not a bad idea.
Right.
But for the people that are looking for their soulmates or looking for their marriage partner, I think there's a beautiful criterion as stated in our Torah. And that is that when Isaac met Rivka, his wife, his wife-to-be, he took her to the tent of his mother, Sarah. And the tent of Sarah was darkened after her death, but when Rivka walked in, the light lit. There was light in the tent, and he realized that it was his mother's way of saying, this is the one that will take my place in the relationship with you as I was with your father Abraham. Then it says, he knew her, she became his wife, and he loved her. Usually it's the opposite.
Right.
Usually he loved her, he knew her, and she became his wife. And here we're learning a very beautiful lesson, is that when you meet someone and you're attracted to them, you're physically attracted to them, you want to have a relationship with them, you want to have sex with them, and then you get to know the person, okay? And then usually you marry them, and it doesn't take a lot of time, probably the first 6 months of the year of marriage. After that, it's not such a great thing that you have to hop into bed every night. It sort of becomes a pleasant relationship. It becomes a friendship as well as a sexual relationship. He knew her. He knew her soul. He knew that she would be the one to be able to give off the generation of light that she had to do. And he loved her. But he loved her from all the things that she did after they were married, from the growth that he experienced after that he married. Not that it came from that first sexual love or the first drive, the emotional wanting to cling to somebody else, but rather he knew her soul. The minute that he took her into his mother's tent, he knew that she was going to be for him. So he married her, he became his wife, and then he loved her for all the years to come. So the moral of the story is that for all of us today, even though there's struggle and there's controversy, that struggle, may take that relationship to the place of love. Because Isaac, had it grown by itself, in a relationship that wasn't geared into any spiritual purpose, I doubt if there could be love for all of those years. And so that, in today's turmoil, in today's age, most of that turmoil is there as opportunities for us to grow spiritually. And that spiritual growth, if it's with a partner of our choice, and they also want to go with you, and they're shoulder to shoulder with you, and they bear the brunt of it, and even though sometimes it seems so discerning, and yet, in that relationship can be the place where we find that love, that unity. I think there's another aspect here that nobody talks about. It's sort of like a taboo subject. And that is the idea of male and female souls entering male and female beings that are not male and female.
Right.
For instance, what happens to a soul that's an effeminate soul that enters a male body? So you have a relationship that is homosexual. But the reason that it's homosexual is because that actual soul is an effeminate soul. And it says in the Zohar, how does that happen? It says that when the woman is dominant in the act of sex and she sort of is controlling the situation, sometimes she forces down a soul, a female soul, that goes into a male body. It's sort of like the woman that is hounding her husband all the time, and he's henpecked and he's listening to her. In that relationship, there's a larger chance that the soul entering that body could be a homosexual soul, which means that the soul inside the male body is absolutely female, and therefore he clings and looks for another male partner, opposite to the lesbian. Lesbian soul is a soul of a male that, by a quirk, gets put into a female body. Now, how can I say for a fact that that's true? Well, first of all, the Zohar tells us about the feminine soul. That's number one. And number two, if you look around you, you'll see that most of the creative talent in the world that is by males are homosexuals. The designers, the writers, the creative talent. And where does creative talent come from?
From the female.
The side of the female. And therefore we can see, absolutely see, the direction that the soul is inside of itself, inside of this body. Now, this has nothing to do with judgment. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's for God. We're not involved with that part. But just the explanation as to where that spirit comes from and what we can do about recognizing it when we see it.
So Karen, obviously it's not DNA, it's not something that's in our chromosomes or our genetic makeup that happens that makes us this way. There's a bigger picture, there's something spiritual that's happening.
Absolutely. And the DNA is there, the chromosomes are there to do the bidding, if you will, of our spiritual nature. And a lot of it has to do with what we call tikkun and other people call karma. That means that which we've done in previous lifetimes, be it positive or negative, are the basket by which we come into this lifetime, either to grow from or to remove the negatives. Sometimes we're fortunate and we work hard and we're put in a position that we can accomplish the job, and other times we come back again with another heavier karma than we've left with.
Cool.
But basically, the DNA and all the other physicality, and DNA to us is physical, are all related and correspond to metaphysical levels.
Karen, I wanted to ask you, what happens when two people are together, they're married, one of them embarks on a spiritual journey to try to better themselves, to become more spiritual, whatever the reason may be, then they've sort of left their mate behind. I'm not saying what happens on a physical level, because we know oftentimes people will end up separating or they'll go their separate ways, but cosmically, are they doing something?
I think I have your question, and it's asked me many times, what happens when you have a couple and one is so involved and enthused and the other one just doesn't care, doesn't want to be a part of anything spiritual, not only Kabbalah, but perhaps any type of spiritual teaching? And the answer that most often is given, at least I give, is that there is no coercion in spirituality, that God didn't ask us to be. So how can we coerce? What we have to do is the same way as we've grown this relationship from the beginning. It's just to change the way we act. And by our response, hopefully, they will see the difference and change, and they will come along our way because they see how much it's benefited you in your life, how you've changed, how you are less angry, how you're less irritable, how the relationship between you and your partner has become better because of it. But if you're going to say, you're going to come with me, or you have to do this, then that's not spiritual. So the things that you're learning are not being implemented in your life, even though you think they might be.
Great. Karen, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.